This is Lecture 79B on Primitive Communism of Tribal Agriculture and Simple Chiefdoms in Sub-Saharan Africa. As you know, this is part of a series of lectures that accompanies Volume 6 in the ABCs of Communism, Bolshevism 2018, and in Volume 6. So for us, the term Neolithic or New Stone Age comes with V. Gordon Childs' concept of Neolithic Revolution. Arising was tribal agricultural sedentary pottery-using society. And these societies' most important diagnostic was a mode of production featuring food production as opposed to food collection through hunting and gathering. The Neolithic was characterized by the adoption in varying order of animal domestication, agriculture, ceramic production, and semi or completely sedentary village life. At some point, this process ended in the transition from primitive communism's last stage of tribal agriculture into chiefdom transitional stages, and in the latter of those two chiefdom transitional stages occurs urbanization. In Africa, the process of Neolithization varies according to region and their human groups, and we observe in the archaeological literature interchangeable terms for the same sites, such as Neolithic, Proto-Neolithic, Meso-Neolithic, Epi-Paleolithic, or Final Paleolithic. This sloppiness in terminology makes overall understanding of the process difficult for beginning students, and I shall supplant these terms with our own as needed. In Africa, the organic remains of different production emphasizing systems are poorly preserved in the sub-Saharan tropical acidic iron-rich soils. Therefore, we have to expand the limitations of archaeological methodology to handle the search for practices of animal husbandry and agriculture. Evidence such as rock art helps identify animal husbandry, and the presence of low stone walls helps to infer the use of farming perimeters. On the other hand, such material remains are more complex in their dating. There are equally important aspects with any Neolithic sites, including those in Africa, with the presence of silos and grinding materials. Such evidence helps associate a site with the management of wild grains and/or with domesticated cereals. Societies anywhere, including Africa, must eventually be on the road to Neolithic Revolution, even when the sedentary way of life or the domestication of plants and animals is not fully established. And this has been proven repeatedly in the New World. In Africa, the creative shaping of clay and its firing is also such evidence. Why is this true? Understanding the World Neolithic Revolution. We Marxists accept dialectical and historical materialism as the foundation of scientific history. This allows us to avoid the pitfalls of endless cogitation and the resulting chatter about environmental fluctuations interacting as primary causes with the remnants of their archaeological and physical anthropological records. And why is this true? Because we begin by asserting that primary causation is internal to any given phenomena. In sociocultural phenomena, that primary causation lies in culture. Culture has its mode of production with the components of technology and social organization, and arising upon this mode of production is the superstructure of ideology. As a world or global sociocultural event is the final stage of primitive communism we call the stage of tribal agriculture. V. Gordon Childs termed the event, marked by the invention of food production, as opposed to the preceding era of food collection, as the Neolithic Revolution. And Neolithic Revolution is a term even more applicable today, given the results of the years that have passed since Karl Marx's death in 1883. In that year, there was no archaeological data about tribal agriculture's origins or the origins of the succeeding transitional chiefdom stages. Nevertheless, Marx was able to see, even without the archaeology, that these stages of tribal agriculture and chiefdoms were the point of transition. His insight was based on his study of the then accumulated ethnographic data about living primitives. The transition to slavery must have happened in the chiefdom stages of prehistory, he had concluded, and then humanity left primitive communism behind permanently. How then do we pick an ideal Neolithic revolution? perhaps by listing the traditional series of attributes all occurring at the same time in the archaeological record, that is, ceramics, ground and polished stone tools, semi-sedentary or sedentary village life. Or alternatively, by picking that part of the world where dependence upon agriculture first occurred, or in some combination of these factors. A refined approach compares and contrasts the areas of origin and evolution of tribal agriculture. Along this path, it becomes apparent that it is in nuclear China that we have the ideal sociocultural formation of Neolithic Revolution and the inherent subsequent emergence of the chiefdom transitional stages, the most useful diagnostic being time. The Upper Paleolithic transforms in the Old World to the Neolithic quicker in China than elsewhere, and certainly faster than in the Americas. We know that the dependence upon agriculture in the New World took several thousand years longer in North and Middle America than in China, because the Americans had fewer animals and plants from which to pick domesticates. In fact, only corn in the North and Middle America was a domesticatable grass seed protein supplier that was sufficient. Even South America had to await the coming of corn from Mesoamerica as a sufficient staple protein grass. We know that in Africa there were too many potential animals and plant domesticates to promote a fast transition to total dependence upon agriculture. In other words, Africa was different in this regard precisely because people often found it preferable to maintain some dependence upon collected animal and plant foods so vastly abundant in the Dark Continent. Africa is unique in segregating this collecting reliance among different societies, so that some specialized in collecting X and others Y, and trading among themselves to get the preferred balance, and doing this for a long time, even to the present in fact, alongside their growing dependence upon pastoral agriculture. While we have evidence for the collective appearance of all essential attributes of the African Neolithic systems, such as agriculture, animal husbandry, pottery, sedentary village life, they also did exist at the same time in several contemporaneous groups. In some African settings, people chose the path of separate yet complementary modes of subsistence. That is, some societies specialized in one or another of the domains of food production, while counting on their neighbors for complementary goods. This created its own complex situation of interdependent relationships between different populations, each having varieties of emphasis in their modes of production. In the highly fruitful environments of the Dark Continent, the intensive collecting and storing of certain edible wild plants as food staples was often a dietary supplement to horticulture, and then agriculture during the African Neolithic Revolution. In the preparation of such collectibles, peoples could use the same cooking additives and utensils as those used in the preparation of agricultural products. Thus in Africa, as in the Americas, ongoing foraging is an intermediary primitive communist mode of production component between hunters, gatherers, and sedentary farmers. This form of proto-farming promoted territorial organization, including regular land clearing, especially by slashing and burning. Land clearance favors the multiplication of grasses and a certain degree of semi-sedentary life, since seasonal halts in certain places are imposed for foraging. Ethnographic observation in modern Mali shows plants or wild grasses being collected in the natural environment. This collection was and remains the focus of much commerce in Malian markets, and the foods collected are prepared with the same equipment and in the same way as our agricultural products. Very early societies with a Neolithic way of life are always partially based on wild grains, and so they were in Africa. These societies mastered pottery and probably other techniques considered as Neolithic. Within this clarified definition, better suited to Africa, the same essential elements as in the traditional definition are present: pottery, animal husbandry, agriculture, and sedentary village life. These diagnostic elements may be present within a group of interacting contemporaneous societies and/or within a single society. Despite the disappearance of organic remains in African sediments, we know that some societies at the end of the Pleistocene and early Holocene were based on intensive selective gathering that prepared and launched a true African Neolithic system. African abundance. African plant domesticates include coffee, cola, watermelon, yams, okra, black-eyed peas, African rice, and baobab. The first domestication of plants for agricultural purposes in Africa occurred in the Sahel region around 7000 BP, when sorghum and African rice, Oryza glaberrina, began to be cultivated. About 6000 BP, the climate of the Sahara and the Sahel started to become drier at an exceedingly fast pace. This climate change caused lakes and rivers to shrink significantly and caused increasing desertification. This, in turn, decreased the amount of land conducive to settlements and helped to cause migrations of farming communities to the more humid climate of West Africa. The most famous crop domesticated in the Ethiopian highlands is coffee. Khat, Ensete, Doog, teff, and finger millet were domesticated also in the Ethiopian highlands. Crops domesticated in the Sahel region include sorghum and pearl millet. The kola nut, extracts from which became an ingredient in Coca-Cola, was first domesticated in West Africa. Other crops domesticated in West Africa include African rice, African yams, black-eyed peas, and the oil palm. Domesticated animals of Africa. Genetic analysis of domesticated animal species have revealed that domestic donkeys are descended from African ancestors. The contribution of indigenous aurochs to African domestic cattle revealed an earlier and possible exogenous origin for the domestic cat, and threw new light on African dog origins. Genetic diversity studies and the mapping of unique traits in African cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens perfected these animals for regional environmental challenges. Complex patterns of interaction began among Africans with Southwest Asia and other Asian regions on the Indian Ocean. At 7000 BP in the Sahel, fonio and the small guinea fowl were domesticated. Archaeologists working in Africa have genetic evidence that many domestic species originated in Africa. Dogs began as compatriots in human settlements and evolved over generation in their toleration and proximity with humans. In all animal domestication cases, the process operates at the level of an animal population engaged behaviorally with humans. Those species that tolerated human proximity prospered and, most importantly, bred under human management and became domesticates. Relevance to the process of dogs becoming comfortable with humans is a recent study that includes unconscious selection of physical traits that was done on a research colony of silver morph red foxes, Vulpes vulpes. The human management was done in Novosibirsk, Russia. Beginning in 1959, managers of a founding stock of 130 individuals selectively bred one line from animals that most tolerated captivity and human contact in each generation. Another control line was allowed to retain the fear-aggression responses typical of captive wild foxes. Within 10 generations, about 20% of the human-tolerant bloodline displayed considerable friendliness toward humans, seeking attention in a dog-like manner, barking, tail wagging, jumping up, and licking. The friendly line also saw unforeseen physical changes, such as pups born with white blazes on faces and chests and curling tails. All of these are traits that distinguish dogs from wolves. The human breeders had not deliberately selected for such traits, so this clearly is a case of unconscious selection. Ancient Egyptian art depicts monkeys picking fruit for their handlers, and gazelles tame enough to be led by a halter, although the monkeys at least left no progeny substantially divergent in behavior or form from their wild type. Selection for or against physical and behavioral traits operates at the population level. As humans controlled an animal's foraging choices, exposure to predators, and mate choice, and moved it into new environmental situations, they altered the natural selective context and pressures. The genetic origins of such changes in male sheep and goat horns were probably initially unplanned byproducts of human management. Horns are energetically costly structures, continuously selected for among wild males, competing for rank, meaning access to mates, by clashing heads and sparring with their horns. When human choice of horn size became the determinant of the male's reproductive success, selective pressure for large horn size relaxed. In other words, mutations for smaller horns, which would never have favored reproductive success in the wild, emerged among later generations. Humans saw that reduced horn size allows the bearers to divert energy into other channels, such as earlier sexual maturity, higher sperm production, and more offspring. Pigs were early Neolithic captives that responded well to their surroundings in pens under human management. The diversity of coat color in pigs is the initial result of relaxed natural selection pressure on the coat pattern of predecessor wild boars. Many African ungulate species are unsuited to close human management. Penned gazelles panic and may mortally injure themselves or other animals in trying to escape. Males of some antelope species establish and maintain small individual territories, called leks, which estrus females enter to mate. Human herding and penning disrupts this, interfering with the species' reproduction. Domestic ungulates come from the Artiodactyla group of living hooved or cloven-hooved mammals with 100 living species. Now these ungulates gave rise under human management to such familiar domestic animals as sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, and cows. Humans manipulating their reproductive strategy by choosing the breeding male and castrating or slaughtering the others. African bovids such as the sheep-like aoudad, Ammotragus lurvia, and some savanna antelopes and wild equines display dominance-based social organization and reproductive ecology. The common African eland, the Taratragus oryx, is not so commonly known among Europeans or Americans, but was successfully tamed and managed in Africa for thousands of years. Evidence from late 9th millennium BP in southwestern Libya suggests that some African foragers, perhaps prompted by regional desiccation, did initiate experiments with keeping the Barbary sheep. These are known scientifically as the audads, the Ammotragus lurvia. They are North African goat-descended mammals of the family Bovidae, order Artiodactyla. At the Uan Afuda cave in the central Sahara 10,000 years ago, foragers penned a herd of Barbary sheep in the back of the cave, possibly narcotizing them with leaves of a local shrub, eventually using them for food. This did not lead to domestication, but was a concurrent concomitant of the Neolithic Revolution there. The common eland, Taratragus oryx, also known as the southern eland or eland antelope, is a savanna and plains antelope found in east and southern Africa. It is a species of the family Bovidae and the genus Taratragus. Adult male is around 5 feet tall, and the female is about 8 inches shorter, and can weigh up to 2,100 pounds, with a male average of 1,100 to 1,300 pounds and 750 to 981 pounds for females. It is the second largest antelope in the world, being slightly smaller on average than the giant eland. Mainly a herbivore, its diet is primarily grasses and leaves, and common elands form herds of up to 500 animals, yet are not territorial. The common eland prefers habitats with a variety of flowering plants such as savanna, woodlands, and open and montane grasslands, and it avoids dense forests. It also uses large barks, visual and postural movements, and some communicate to the others, warning of danger. The common eland was and still is used by humans for leather, meat, and rich, nutritious milk, and is domesticated. It is native to Angola, Botswana, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Rwanda, South Africa, South Sudan, Swaziland, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. However, cattle penning does not appear in northeast Africa until the next millennium. The Nubian wild ass was domesticated between the 7th and 6th millennia BP, and sheep and goats were introduced into the same region around 7000 BP. African foragers were successfully manipulating bovine stock, bringing at least one such lineage into a domesticated state from the early to the middle Holocene. Now, with regard to archaeology, there are recent early tribal agricultural discoveries in Onjugu in Mali. These sites reveal that Africa witnessed the appearance of the most ancient ceramics in the world at the beginning of the 12th millennium BP. That are the earliest ceramics in Sub-Saharan Africa. Meanwhile, recent researches in the Sahara and in the Nile Valley demonstrate the practice of domestication of bovines in the 1100s 11,000s BP. Thus, cattle as domesticates appear more than 1,000 years before domesticated cattle in Greece and the Near East. Unjugu is the name of a locality in the middle of an important complex of over 100 archaeological sites in the upper Yame Valley on the Bandiagara Plateau in Dogon County of Mali. Analysis of its many layers, rich in archaeological and botanical remains, has led to the establishment of a major chronological, cultural, and environmental sequence. This sequence is crucial to understanding the settlement patterns in the inland Niger Delta and West Africa. Unjugu has yielded the earliest pottery found in Sub-Saharan Africa. A recent transformation of the Yame River made possible the discovery of the archaeological potential of Unjugu because a major flood changed the river's water course, leading to strong erosion in the surrounding quaternary formations. A vertical cut created spectacular visible gullies and created exposures exceeding 30 feet in height. The exposed stratigraphic sequence contains many archaeological layers with a broad chronological range extending from the lower Paleolithic to the present, and among the Unjugu sequence are a series of Holocene layers relevant to the Neolithic Revolution with well-preserved organic remains, including charcoal, pollen, leaves, seed, and wood. After 2005, research expanded to the Bandiagara Cliff and the Sino Plain with the aim of further defining the Unjugu Neolithic Revolution via clarification of the gaps in the Yame Valley sequence. Many Pleistocene and Holocene sites were discovered. Now, the Paleolithic Unjugu. We have an accurate Pleistocene Paleolithic sequence at Unjugu with 50 OSL dates on the stratigraphic units. Moreover, some sedimentary gaps observed in the Unjugu Pleistocene sequence coincide with abrupt Heinrich 4 and 5 climatic events during isotopic stage 3. The earliest evidence of human occupation is seen at several sites in the complex in the form of a lithic industry composed of quartzite sandstone polyhedrals and subspheroids made from worked cobbles. The technological typology is an early phase of the Paleolithic in stratigraphic lenses of coarse sands indurated with iron oxide adhering to the bedrock. The beginning of the Middle Paleolithic, based on the technotypology, is about 500,000 BP. An OSL date on the final Middle Pleistocene of 180,000 years also dates the end for this Middle Paleolithic stone tool industry. Although having widespread archaeological visibility, the Acheulean has until now been absent in the Unjugu zone and the Dogon country in general. This may indicate the existence in West Africa of regions unfrequented by Acheulean populations, although well represented in neighboring regions. All of the older Pleistocene lithic industries at Unjugu are chronologically associated with the Middle Paleolithic. A level wall core with preferential removals found isolated in stratigraphic context is the first evidence for the Middle Paleolithic at Onjugu. The OSL date on the context places this core around 150,000 BP during the late Middle Pleistocene. Middle Paleolithic occupations in the Onjugu zone are all open-air sites. They become even more common during the Upper Pleistocene, with 25 different typotechnological groups occurring between 100,000 and 22,000 BP. There is a concentration during isotopic stage 3 between 50,000 and 30,000 BP. The Upper Paleolithic industries date between 100,000 and 20,000 BP and are extremely diverse. This explosion in tool types is common worldwide, with the maximization of broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation. The appearance of blade production at 65,000 BP is followed by discoidal reduction around 60,000 BP. Then the appearance of foliate bifacial pieces around 50,000 BP, and the disappearance of level technique around 33,000 BP altogether. Continuity in raw stone types in the Middle Paleolithic is shown by the quartz cobble industry that has characteristics comparable to the early Paleolithic. This study of several sites at Onjugu has also enabled description of a new industry with massive tools, rebots, and pieces obtained by bipolar on-anvil percussion. The existence of this kind of assemblage is confirmed at a rock shoulder in the Bandiagara escarpment. From 11,500 BP to 8,750 BP, we have the onset of the Holocene. The region confronted more humid conditions, and these were caused by a rapid return of the monsoon after the Younger Dryas and the development of an open grassland savanna on the Bandiagara Plateau. Certainly we know that pottery appears early at Onjugu, that is during the first half of the 12th millennium BP. These ceramics are characterized by diagnostic small bowls and projectile points, and there is a new hunted fauna and edible wild grasses that people were prepared technologically to exploit. Thus we have the proto-agricultural economy consisting of a strategy of selective and intensive gathering of grasses. In the layers dated in the 10th millennium BP, the pottery is associated with grounded polished stoneware. Therefore, in all aspects, we have the Neolithic Revolution at Onjugu. From 8750 to 5300 BP, the hydrographic functioning of the Yami Valley during these Middle Pleistocene years clearly reflects the more humid climate context of tropical Africa, especially between 7300 and 5300 BP. The occupation of Onjugu, Mali, is interrupted by an important archaeological hiatus of about 2,000 years at the end of the early Holocene. Then appears an archaeologically identified workshop that specialized in quartzite sandstone bifacial points in the Yami Valley. From 5300 to 2400 BP, we have the middle to late Holocene transition, the Onjugu zone, that was part of dense wooded Sudanian savanna and is associated with Guinean-type wetlands. Between 3600 and 4200 BP, the botanical landscape witnessed a region-wide shift, and this reflected a reduction in precipitation and increased aridity in the Yami Valley. Tribal agriculturalists increased their pastoral emphasis in their mode of production. However, both agriculture and pastoralism existed in the Yami Valley between 3800 and 3400 BP. Between 3400 and 2800 BP, this tribal agricultural stage flourished with many farming villages. And then the Neolithic at Onjugu ends between 2800 and 2400 BP. 2400 BP to AD 2018, from an archaeological perspective, this pre-Dogon period is dated at Onjugu from 2400 BP. Its tribal agriculture were flourishing between the AD 600s and 1200s. The ceramic metalwork assemblages for this period are well known from the rock shelter sites of Dangan Dulun and in the nearby Bandiagara escarpment on the site of Nuruboro. There are funerary clay coiled structures dating between the 8200s and 300s still being used in 2018. Recent data show the Dogon country for the past 2 millennia to have been an open region wherein migrant craftsmen sold their objects and expertise. They also traveled to the Mima, the inland Niger Delta, the Gourma or Odalan coast, east, and the Burkina Faso and Voltaic of southeastern Senegal. Research at Unjugu also showed lakes between the Bandiagara Plateau and the neighboring Mande, Gur, and Songhay ethno-linguistic spheres. Analysis of the surface ceramic assemblages from a dozen abandoned villages near Unjugu and radiocarbon dating of one of these indicates that the Bandiagara Plateau was occupied by the Dogon from the AD 1400s. In addition, ethno-historical surveys reveal several waves of settlement by Dogon clans, followed by multiple relocations and reoccupations of villages. This appears to me to be a reflection of inter- and intra-ATC warfare, that is, between advanced theocratic chiefdoms, within them and between them. The different ceramic traditions and metallurgical production support this hypothesis. So we have new perspectives on the African Neolithic. By 10,500 BP, the Sahara was a lush, fertile valley that was far different from what we know today. Prehistoric modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, had migrated back to the highlands of the Sahara in Africa. Humanity in the Neolithic thrived along with their animals and plants. They used stone and wooden tools to farm the land and even began to use pottery. Between 10,000 and 7,000 BP, Sahara animal herding became as important as agricultural farming. Some villages raised sheep, goats, and cattle. Others fished in the lakes and rivers with bone harpoons, fishing hooks, and nets, and semi-sedentary villages became permanent villages. Before 4000 BP in East Africa, we know the Neolithic with agriculture and herding had replaced hunting and gathering for most peoples and lasted until about 1300 years ago. It can be divided into early, evolved, and late stages, each with distinctive ceramic wares, lithic industries, and modes of production. On the Sub-Saharan African continent, 3 areas independently invented agriculture. These are the Ethiopian highlands, secondly the Sahel, and thirdly West Africa. Bananas and plantains were independently domesticated in Africa by 5,000 years ago. Asian yams and taro were also cultivated in Africa. The most famous crop domesticated in the Ethiopian highlands is coffee. But in addition to that, we have the domestication of khat, inseti, noog, teff, and finger millet, all domesticated in the Ethiopian highlands. Crops domesticated in the Sahel region include sorghum and pearl millet. The kola nut was first domesticated in West Africa, and other crops domesticated in West Africa include African rice, yams, and the oil palm. Since the late 1960s, at southern African archaeological sites, many sheep bones have been recovered. At the moment, it appears that true agriculture spread to Central and Southern Africa during the Bantu expansion of the first millennium BC to the first millennium AD. And that brings us to a conclusion of this lecture, which highlights some of the important parts that are in your volume 6 on the African Neolithic.